Thank you to Richard in Brighton for allowing me to start the week with a smile on my face. He has texted me already to say, why wouldn't you give them Ian Dale's phone number, James? What is wrong with him? I have absolutely no intention whatsoever to omit Ian from the list of LBC presenters whose details I would theoretically hand over to a potential blackmailer to whom I had unwisely sent intimate pictures of myself. Now, I mentioned that I have a smile on my face. Let me stress immediately that there is a seaside postcard element to this story, but it is a deadly serious story. I think we may, on Friday, have veered very... what's the word I want? I think we may have veered pretty close to not treating this story with the respect that it demands. As soon as I provide these counterfactuals and imagine that it was me in the situation that the MP William Wragg finds himself in, the temptation to go a bit end of pier, to go a bit seaside postcard, to go a bit sniggersome, is big, isn't it? I mean, it's a considerable temptation. So I'm not going to be able to resist that temptation today. In fact, offering you the theoretical scenario of me fearful of blackmail, sending the contact details of all of my LBC colleagues to a stranger who could, for all I know, be a spy or worse. I think we need to recognise the severity of this. There was one newspaper columnist this weekend who seemed to think it was hilarious, at which point you sort of wonder how bent your brain must be not to respond a little bit more robustly to a tale, lest we forget. An essential sex trap target is the phrase that one newspaper chooses to use today as they reveal that an ex-minister is or was among the targets of William Wragg's contact on Grindr. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. So how do you think we should do this? We had a conversation because, I mean, this is obviously an incredibly important story, and I am confused by two things. Number one, I am confused about the fact that William Wragg retains the Conservative whip. And number two, I am confused about the fact that members of the media who claim to care about probity and integrity, or perhaps even, were we to coin a phrase that was popular not that long ago, integrity, professionalism and accountability, are not sharing the views of people like Andrea Jenkins. I mean, you can tell this is a big deal when I find myself on the same side of a story as a politician as ridiculous and unpleasant as Andrea Jenkins. But in this scenario, I'm afraid she's absolutely right. Unlike some MPs, she says, I am not happy with Wragg. As a mother with a young child who only recently had threats, it's unforgivable of him to compromise the security of fellow MPs. Action is needed. Now, even a stopped clock is right twice a day, but she is absolutely and incontrovertibly right. It is unforgivable of him to compromise the security of fellow MPs. No disciplinary action by the party. Backing from some cabinet ministers and some senior Tories. Oliver Dowden said yesterday he did not think that his colleague should step down as vice chairman of the influential 1922 committee, and Jeremy Hunt described his apology as courageous and fulsome, which suggests, among other things, that Jeremy Hunt is not entirely, unless Jeremy Hunt is being unexpectedly fork-tongued in this case, that would suggest he doesn't know exactly what the word fulsome means. Other colleagues are furious with Mr. Wragg, with some, according to reports this weekend, branding him Toe Wragg. The most felicitous or original nickname imaginable, but there it is. So how do we do this? How do we do this? We talked about it before we came on air, which we sometimes do, and the first thing you might think of would be my little coma question. Are you familiar with my coma question? So I say to you, imagine I've been asleep for 10 years, and you remember what this country was like 10 years ago, in 2014. I have just woken up and I'm reading a story about a prominent Conservative MP sending pictures of his privates to a complete stranger, and then, when fearful of blackmail, coughing up the contact details of colleagues, including senior colleagues, opening them up to sex trap targeting and possibly worse, opening them up to future blackmail, because we're told, aren't we, that 3 of the people contacted responded in precisely the way that the potential blackmailer was hoping. So is it a coma question? I mean, is it a what would happen to you at work kind of question? I genuinely haven't run this by management because they're a cautious and excitable bunch, and I don't like to give them conniptions unless absolutely necessary. But just imagine for a minute, not that this was me, but that this was you. I don't know what you do for a living, but imagine that it were a job that had at least some modicum of either public profile or security, whether it's trade secrets, company secrets, whatever it might be. You send a picture of your privates to a complete stranger, and then when fearful of blackmail, you respond to protect yourself by handing over the private contact details of senior colleagues. I mean, the more I say this out loud, the Daily Mail's desperate attempts to malign Angela Rayner for possibly not paying a few, $1.5 of capital gains tax 15 years ago. I mean, listen, I appreciate. Do you want to know a little insight into right-wing media? If you ever catch anyone in the right-wing media saying, is this a story or not, they know it isn't. Okay? So this William Wragg story, you won't catch me sitting, and for the record, I don't care whether he's Labour, Conservative or Monster Raving Loony Party. He happens to be a member of the governing party. You won't catch me sitting here saying, is this a story or isn't it? Because I know it is. And you know it is. And the mad thing is this morning that they know it is as well. The Conservative Party know it is. The Conservative client journalists currently pretending to be deeply concerned about Angela Rayner and a 15-year-old £1,500 potential overlooked payment. They know that this is a huge story. But I don't think it's dead catting. I don't like the dead cat theory. I don't think anybody is pretending to care about one story in order to distract attention from the other. Even the Mail have gone in quite hard on this. Ex-minister's furious she is first woman to reveal herself as sex trap target. So the client journalist angle is not as strong as it usually is. This is about the Tory party. This is about the Tory party not punishing somebody who has done something objectively outrageous. So I think it becomes a question of why? I think it's a question about the broader malaise. I could be wrong. Christian is in Fort William. Just flat out, I'd be sacked, he says. Well, who wouldn't be sacked? Who would? So what have you done? Just imagine the HR meeting. Come in, Mr. Wragg. Sit down. Nice to see you. Would you like a cup of tea? Thank you very much. Andrew, could you get a cup of tea for Mr. Wragg, please? Now, what's happened? We've had... What's all this about? What's all this about? Can I say that word on the radio yet? No? Intimate pictures. Intimate pics. What's all this about intimate... Well, yeah, I have actually... I'm afraid I've sent some photographs of my... John Thomas. I have sent some... Can I say that? Why can't I say that? What can I say? Penis. I've sent... Yeah, all right, let's not faff about. Let's remember what we said about the seriousness of this and the importance of resisting any seaside postcard style temptations. I've been sending pictures of my penis to a complete stranger on a gay dating app. Okay. Better close the door. And I'm afraid that I was fearful that they might use them to... or they might expose me, if you pardon the pun. I was fearful that they might expose me. So when they asked for loads of details of colleagues, what sort of details, William? Well, you know, private mobile phone numbers. Yeah. What did you do? I handed them all out. How many? Well, we're currently aware of 18. I'll say that again, actually. I'm not doing the role play anymore. I'm talking directly to you. We're currently aware of 18. Handing over 18, he basically handed over his whole contacts book. 18 individuals having their private phone number, their contact details handed over to a potential blackmailer. Andrew Jenkins told The Telegraph, and listen, you can tell by my voice, it doesn't sit comfortably with me, siding with Andrea Jenkins on anything. She's the one that makes a habit. I think she was one of the first lot of the 2019 intake to block me on Twitter, and she's famous mostly for flicking the V sign at voters. But she told The Telegraph, that it happened at the start of the year. She told the whips, and she says, why are they protecting Wragg? It's bizarre. I told them that he's compromised MPs, for God's sake. I'm a mother, and I don't know what that's got to do with anything, and he shouldn't be handing out anybody's numbers. How is it brave? The brave thing to do would have been to ignore the blackmail. On Friday, Dr. Luke Evans, the Tory MP for Bosworth, revealed that he'd reported to police a naked picture of a woman that he had been sent. That the messages all follow a similar pattern. A influential figure in Westminster is contacted by a person calling themselves either Charlie or Abby. They claim to have met the victim in one of Parliament's bars or at a political event before sending flirtatious messages and then naked pictures in a bid to get the MP to reciprocate. It is believed that 2 more MPs have sent pictures of themselves, raising concerns over blackmail. And it's not currently known who is behind the honey trap messages nor what their intention is. So for the first and I think quite possibly last time in the history of this programme, Dame Andrea Jenkins is posing the question to which I would like you to provide the answers. And here is that question. Why are they protecting Wragg? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. A member of Parliament sends a picture of his privates to a complete stranger and is then blackmailed into providing contact details of at least 18 colleagues, up to and including politicians with ministerial experience, at least 2 of whom are thought to have responded to the blackmailer with intimate photographs of their own. And the man remains not only a Conservative MP in full possession of the Tory whip, but the vice chairman of the highly influential 1922 Committee of Tory Backbenchers. You can come at this because when they create a vacuum, they assume responsibility for whatever moves into that vacuum. I want you to tell me why you think, in answer to Andrea Jenkins's question, why are they protecting Wragg? That's question number 1. 0345 6060 973. Question number 2, you may not know the answer to, in which case, don't ring me immediately. Have a think about it. But what would happen to you? So I'd love to talk to you if you are a civil servant, perhaps, or if you work in the diplomatic corps. Well, you'd be a civil servant as well, wouldn't you? Or you're a police officer. You have experience in a responsible job. A head teacher, perhaps. A head teacher, does that work? I don't know what you do, but and also I don't know how you know whether or not how you know what would happen to you if you did it. Because, I mean, let's be honest, it's not the kind of behaviour that we routinely indulge in, is it? But I don't know how you know what would happen to you if you did it, but I do know that you would probably expect some form of punishment. So I leave you with that thought of me somehow falling for this kind of approach, and when pressured by the blackmailer, handing over the private details of Nick Ferrari, Sheila Fogarty, Tom Swarbrick, Ian Dale, Lewis Goodall, Rachel Johnson, Emily Maitlis, David Lammy. I don't think I can get it up to 18, can I? Sangeeta Maiska, Carol Vorderman. Who else? Ollie Dugmore. I throw him into the mix. Matthew Wright. Who have I missed? Matt Fry. Crikey. That's 14. I'm still 4 shy. And I've had Clive Bull. I've handed over all of their details. Now, seriously, I know that's a slightly comical scenario, but if I came on air this morning with my job untouched, with my reputation apparently untarnished, with my colleagues, a mixture perhaps of absolutely bloody furious, completely befuddled, threatened, upset. 2 of them, and God knows which 2 it would be, had responded by sending naughty pictures of their own to the... Don't text me on that. Two of them have responded by sending naughty pictures of their own to the potential blackmailer, and I would come on air at 10 o'clock on Monday morning as if nothing had happened, my position unchanged, my status undiminished. Come on. Pull the other one. Nick Abbott. How could I forget Nick Abbott? Do you know what? He's not actually a member of the but I'd probably throw in Chris Moyles' number as well for good measure. So that takes us up to about 16, doesn't it? So why are they protecting Wragg, and what would happen to you? 0345 6060 973. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. But remember, this is a serious... and Ben Kentish, thank you, Esther, and Henry Riley. There you go. We've got 18. All of them handed over, all of their numbers. And I turn up for work on Monday morning as if nothing has happened. Come off it. It's 10:18. It is 21 minutes after 10, and I am going to add another name into the mix, actually, when we are puzzling over the response to William Wragg's behaviour, and that name is Hugh Edwards, a quite fantastic broadcaster who got himself into extremely well-documented bother last year, much to the detriment of his own mental health. Even last week, people were pretending to be outraged by the existence of contractual sick pay and the things that are signed when you sign your employment contract. But goodness me, off the top of my head, I don't remember whether or not rent-a-quote Tories were queuing up to give a kicking to Hugh Edwards when he found himself in a different but comparable situation. But goodness me, if you needed evidence of double standards in a glorious technicolor, here they would be. And I'm not an expert on GDPR. I don't know whether or not there is a breach of GDPR here, and that would be a sackable offence in any business as well. That's sort of data protection. I don't know whether that would apply, but someone who is an expert will be able to tell me. Extraordinary, isn't it, to think about the brouhaha surrounding a TV newsreader, albeit arguably the most prominent one in the country, and a member of the governing party, a senior member of the governing party, engaging in, objectively, I think, or arguably much worse behaviour, and compromising his colleagues. Colin's in Newcastle. Colin, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
how you doing?
Very well, thank you.
I'm a retired policeman, so I can answer both your questions.
Oh,
so the first question is, why is he there? Well, you've answered your question. You know the answer. He's a Conservative MP, and we got an election in 6 months' time.
But he's standing down anyway, so there's no... I don't know if it is that. I wouldn't come on air and ask the question if I knew the answer to it, Colin. Well, that's probably not true, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. If Andrea Jenkins is baffled, I appreciate she probably spends much of her life baffled, but if she is, for once, rightly baffled by the question of why on earth they're protecting him, as she says, he's compromised MPs, for God's sake. The question becomes a little bit more complicated than you allow, I think.
I understand, but it's politics, isn't it? The right-wing media are more interested in Angela Rayner and her situation than they are...
fair, only the Mail. I don't think anyone else is particularly bothered by that.
Well, Nick Ferrari mentioned it this morning.
Bless him. I'm sure he went in very hard on the Conservative MP deliberately compromising colleagues who have had ministerial experience as well, but I mean, that's a conversation I can have with him. Yeah. All right, so move on to the... I'm not satisfied with your answer to the first question, for the record, but what's your answer to the second one?
I'm a retired policeman, and there was a guy, a policeman, a serving policeman, many, many years ago, went on a dating website, happened to be in his uniform. He wasn't exposing anything controversial, shall we say, use that word, of his body parts, but he was on a dating website in his uniform, trying to attract females. He was investigated and sacked. So that's the difference. If it had been a policeman or anyone else, civil servant or doctor, they would have been gone long ago investigated. I don't know if there is double standards here. I don't know. I mean, it's a security risk, for God's sake. He's a senior MP.
Yes.
We all suspect the people behind this are not people, it's government agencies, whoever.
Do you think it's more likely to be espionage? Because there was a terrible story not long ago involving a Conservative MP called Brooks Newmark, who fell for a very, very similar thing, and his feet didn't touch the ground. So again, that does slightly challenge your cynical, it's just politicians doing politics argument, because 10 years ago it was a completely different kettle of fish. But it is... I mean, your personal view that it's more likely to be a rogue, more likely to be a governmental level rather than just a journalist trying their luck or something like that.
It could be two things. I mean, as an ex-skeptical policeman, it's either two things. Mostly that there's a means to an end. So it's either someone after money, the usual thing.
That's a great point. It's got to. This is only going to be a step in a process, isn't it? So it's money, influence, or information.
Yeah, power, corruption. The usual three things that cause people to act in a certain way. So this isn't just a one-off person doing this for the fun of it. There is a means and motive. I'm sure that lots of other MPs, if you dig deep enough, I'm sure there are many other MPs or senior civil servants who have also been contacted, because I'm sure they've revealed details of other people. It spirals on. I'm sure this wasn't the first time it's happened recently, and I'm sure it won't be the last.
So suspend and investigate?
Yes. Like you would do any other person.
Like you would do. I don't know that I'd be. I don't want to tempt fate, but I don't know that I'd be on air this morning if this had come out about me last week.
Well, of course you wouldn't. And if I did this, which I wouldn't do, of course I wouldn't do. But I would have been. Put it this way, James. I've seen guys done a lot less, like that guy did.
Yeah,
and he was
just in uniform, because there's things in his contract about bringing into disrepute and all the usual caveats and codicils. And we haven't even touched on the GDPR angle of it, which may have your retirement may have predated that. Thank you, Colin. 0345 6060 973. It is an extraordinary business, really, that has split the Conservative Party, which insulates any concerns about partisanship, because, I am here essentially promoting Andrea Jenkins's position on a story that has affected her personally. So why? And I'll check the details of that Brooks Newmark story from a few years ago as well. But if memory serves, it was an almost identical scenario. Phil's in Margate. Phil, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. I think the question needs to be asked about your security clearance. Again, like the previous caller, retired police officer. I worked around Parliament. I was security cleared.
Okay.
You had to be interviewed every year, personal background, and the main thing they're concentrating on is blackmail.
Yes.
Do you live a lifestyle that could compromise you, and then get an outside agency to blackmail you to get information about the job you do? So, his judgment is outrageous. Just words fail me.
Yes.
But his security clearance should be pulled immediately, because he's still going in and out of Parliament. He's hearing conversations. His colleagues are talking about things that...
He's deputy chair of the 1922 committee, so I don't know how much makes its way down from the chairman, but that is the engine by which prime ministers are replaced.
Trust me, they have dinner together, they have informal chats. He would be privy to certain information that normal members of the public wouldn't be. And again, what's frustrating with all politicians, it's like cleverly mentioning a rehypnol. There's different standards. As a police officer doing 30 years, if you'd have done anything wrong like this, you'd have been out. It didn't matter that you did 30 years exemplary service with lots of commendations.
You've done what?
You would have been
what,
suspended.
Phil? Yeah, but I mean, even if you were teacher's pet, even if you were your boss's favourite copper, they'd just be looking at you as if you've done what?
Yeah.
You've done what? Who? What?
I know. I haven't got a clue who I'm going to vote for later this year, because I've never voted for... I've always voted Conservative, but they're a joke. They're an absolute joke.
And you see this as part of that process. It's just a fade. It's a sign of just epic dysfunction and absence of leadership.
Yes, yeah. Sunak should have suspended him immediately. He's made an incredible error of judgment, and if I'd have done that, doing what I did previously, I'd have been suspended, repositioned, put in an office, not to meet the public, etc., because your judgment's come into question.
Everything's come into question. It's beautifully put, actually. Because, I mean, again, sometimes your face is so close to the screen that you can't see the images, you can only see the pixels. But two retired coppers, both absolutely adamant, A, that a suspension should have been the least of the expected responses, and B, that the gravity of the offence is absolutely immense. And I stress again, this is not a phone-in about whether or not this is important. That would be dishonest and disingenuous. The only time people will ever ask you whether or not a story is important is when they know that it isn't, but they're desperately contributing to the inflation of the idea that it is. I don't know why Angela Rayner just popped into my head. So this is a massively important story. Don't believe me, just ask any coppers that you know. But Rishi Sunak doesn't think so. Or at least Rishi Sunak is behaving as if it isn't. And that's the question I'd like you to answer as well. So what would happen to you? And how or why is Rishi Sunak behaving as if this is not a big deal, when everybody, including him, knows that it is? 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 10:33. Stephen has WhatsApp. You know, you can WhatsApp the studio now. 0345 6060973. Although I won't be opening any attachments for the foreseeable future. James, had this been you, you would not be on air today. I think there's some truth in that. I mean, I can't say for certain without running it by management. And as I say, they're quite an excitable bunch. I don't want to give them any undue concerns. If I had this conversation with management, they'd be worried that I'd done something. I said, what would happen if? What would happen if? But there it is. As a taxi driver, writes Marcus, one part of my job, it sees that speeding is a sackable offence. They don't even need proof. Extraordinary. 10:33 is the time. William Wragg has responded to attempted blackmail or possible blackmail by handing over the private contact details of at least 18 colleagues, 2 of whom are thought to have then sent intimate photographs of themselves to the potential blackmailer, whose identity remains unknown, and the former minister, Andrea Jenkins, who is among the number to be compromised in this way, is asking very simply, why are they protecting him? It's bizarre, and I wonder if you can answer that question today, because as things stand, I can't. 0345 6060973. Linda is in Tenerife. Linda, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I was a primary teacher for 40 years, retired now.
Okay.
I just can't imagine why it's happening at all, why they're so cavalier about it. Because basically, if this happened in teaching, you would be out. In teaching, you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Yes.
And
which is probably how it should be, isn't it?
Well, it is for everything.
Yes.
I mean, I know people that have been hounded out of teaching.
Right.
I won't go into it, but
no.
Small things.
You probably wouldn't. You'd be gone just for sending the picture, maybe. To what would it be?
No,
you met a child's parent at a PTA meeting or something like that, and they. Oh, I don't even want to go there.
First of all, there's many restrictions about what you can do as a teacher.
Of course there are.
In terms of taking photographs.
Yes.
But you would be done for the phone numbers.
Yeah.
Because of data protection. I mean, if you imagined a teacher giving phone numbers of their colleagues...
I can't. I genuinely can't. I mean...
you imagine in a primary school, there may only be 18 members of staff.
Yes, you've handed over everybody's.
And you're giving... that is extremely dangerous to do something like that.
I'm just thinking now about some of these numbers, they're not that hard to get hold of. If you do what I do for a living, for example, you could probably, because we're booking people, not so much on this programme, but on other programmes. Go on.
But with respect, that's not the point.
No, it's not, is it?
As a teacher, you're not allowed to do that. For instance, if I phoned a school, there are certain reasons that I might phone a school to try to contact somebody. And I spoke to the PA in the school.
Yes.
She or he would say, if you give me your phone number, I will pass it on to them. Or if you will give me your
no, I would get an email. Do you know what? You're absolutely right. Whether it was at LBC or whether it was at Penguin or somewhere else that I'd worked, if someone was trying to get hold of me, someone would always check before they passed on my details. And this is people offering me paid work, usually, rather than... You mustn't
even pass on your details.
No.
You have to contact... They would say, you give me your details, I'll give it to them, and they can contact you if they want to.
Yeah, you're just right. And so, I mean, taxi drivers, teachers, coppers, perhaps less surprisingly. I don't know that there's a job in the world. Even if you worked in a restaurant. You worked in a restaurant and you got yourself into bother like this, and the person said, well, can you send me the contact details of everybody else who's serving, everyone else who's waiting tonight on tonight's shift? You send all their private details, and then they start... It's mad, this story, the more you talk about it. Sometimes you wonder whether putting the light on it, like what is it they say about light being a great something or other? Sometimes you do wonder whether the more you talk about it, the more clear it will become why certain things are not being done, why the party is not responding more robustly, why elements of the media are pretending to be much crosser about of Angela Rayner selling a house 15 years ago than they are about this bloke essentially handing over details of his colleagues 15 minutes ago. And then sometimes the more you talk about it, the madder it gets. So look, all of these things are relevant. Tony says, my mate's a roofer. And I always ask his permission before I give his number to anybody else. It's just, it is actually fundamental courtesy. I'm going to read quite a long message now. Thank you, Linda. John's up next in Billericay, but I'm going to read quite a long message now from Paul, because it's quite important, and I've checked the provenance of the company that he works for, and he is a man who very much knows of what he speaks. He writes, I'm a professional investigator based in West London, and I specialise in blackmail, mostly for relatively high net worth individuals. When people are being blackmailed, their whole family and professional reputation is at risk, and their levels of fear are hugely heightened. Anyone being blackmailed is in a state of trauma, and therefore will often make ill-thought-out decisions. Professional blackmailers, and we do have to see blackmailing now as a profession, are adept at putting victims under huge emotional pressure. That is their job. It is very easy to judge a person retrospectively based on fear responses. In my many years of dealing with the victims of blackmail, I have regularly seen people threatening to take their own lives as a result of being blackmailed and the very fabric of their lives being threatened. These are sobering thoughts, writes Paul. And he's absolutely right. They are sobering thoughts. And it may be that plays some part in the thinking of the party leadership, but I'm afraid they need to say so, or they need at least to explain it to Andrea Jenkins, even if they don't want to go public with it. You cannot leave these people exposed in this way without either having a quiet word about why you're not doing what seems to be obviously necessary, or doing what seems to be obviously necessary. 10:40 is the time. Couple of phone lines free, but only if you're quick. John's in Billericay. John, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've got a bit of a unique perspective on this. I'm ex-Met, but I'm also ex-Armed Forces. And when I served in the forces, I held one of the highest generic security clearances you could get. It was TS Strap 2 code word. And to get a level of clearance, you have to go through a massive vetting process, interviewing, ex-partners, family, friends, previous employers. If I would have done what this MP did, I probably would have woken up in the middle of the night to my front door to my room in my barracks being kicked in by the military police, having all of my electronics seized and taken away from me, and probably being thrown in the clink for at least 24 hours whilst everything was investigated. The same in the police. If I'd have done what he did whilst I was serving in the police, I would have probably gone into work, been hauled into an office, been told that I'm being investigated, been suspended, had all of my electronics taken off of me, because it is such a ridiculous security breach that, I'm just dumbfounded. Like a lot of your police, armed forces listeners, I am dumbfounded, not only by what he's done, but it shows such a poor lack of judgment, but the catastrophic way that it's been handled by the people who are supposed to be leading this country. What example is it setting? It is absolutely ridiculous.
I hadn't even thought of that element of it, but, in charge of national security, literally in charge of national security. Ultimately, the buck stops with the Prime Minister, and he's the one that's dropped the ball, to mix my metaphors somewhat clumsily. Just for because I can work it out, and elements of it will be obvious. But what are they guarding against? What is this level of scrutiny protecting the service and more broadly the country from? What threats are they worried about, John?
So to give you an example, at the base where I used to work, I won't say which one it was, but the base I used to work, we were told that when we're off duty, as when I was in the forces, the pub that we used to go and frequent, we always had to be on the lookout for people approaching us, offering us bribes, befriending us, honey traps, that kind of stuff, because even back then they knew that our adversaries around the world knew how to get information from us if they put us in a compromising situation. I didn't even hold any.
That's how it works, isn't it? And you might not even realise that some of the information, and you probably would, but some of us might not even realise we're in possession of information that might be of interest to a bad actor until they actually ask us for it. So what time is that going to happen? And who's going to be there? And what's
exactly.
that? It is. It's an extraordinary. I mean, it's not even a lapse in judgment, is it? It's an extraordinary saga. Thank you, John. I mean, big minutes. Remember, people who are still in the service are not really allowed to talk to people like me in conversations like this. But it's notable, isn't it, how people with experience are queuing up. But what I find perhaps even more shocking is how people who have not got jobs that you think of as being in any way related to national security or even personal security are pretty adamant that their feet wouldn't touch the floor if they behaved like this as well. Pat writes, I work for a charity, James. If I did this, I'd never be able to work with vulnerable people again, as my firm would report me to the disclosure barring surface. Geraldine reminds us the whole point of MPs, James, is that they represent us and we rely on their judgment. This might be wishful thinking, but he should obviously be expelled as he's simply not up to the job in any obvious way. And on it goes. 10:43 is the time. Frank's in Hyde. Frank, what would you like to say?
Hi, listening to the comments developing, it really is quite interesting.
Isn't it?
I mean, I live in Johnny Reynolds' constituency.
Yes.
He was preceded by James Pennell, who was parachuted in from Islington. Pennell made his reputation by, if he missed an event or a function, he'd have himself airbrushed in and the pictures sent to the press.
Right.
Now, looking at what's happened here, Wragg is absolutely appalling. I gave your researcher the example of a minor, well, I say a minor, it was a serious breach of trust, but not a financial breach of trust in the company I worked with.
Go on.
And the offender was hauled in and given a straight option of being sacked, with it going on his record, or resigning and losing his pension. Now, when you look beyond
neither of those options have been put in front of William Wragg.
Well,
I think you're suggesting that your former colleague's misdemeanour was of an altogether less grave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Wragg gave notice that he was not going to stand way back. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before.
Mm.
So he's been going for a long time. Why did he decide to go? But the other question that raises itself in my mind, at the beginning of the programme, you demonstrated, argument's sake, a basket full of 18 of your colleagues who would be prejudiced by such a nefarious action. So, argument's sake, James, you are utterly unaware you've got a blackmailer or somebody who's subject to blackmail in your midst. And out of the blue, you get a Facebook or a WhatsApp or a whatever demanding that you send a picture of your dodger over the internet. Would you?
Well, Frank, I'd like to think you know the answer to that. I don't know how often you tune in, but I'd like to feel we've built a connection over the airwaves and that you can answer that question yourself.
Yeah. How come 18 MPs did?
Well, 2 did, we believe. 18 were contacted. I mean, but 2 out of 18 is not a bad hit rate. It did actually. Can I tell you this? Shall I tell you this story? I'll check with the producer, but something happened to me quite recently that actually, now Frank comes to mention it, may be relevant to the to the question that he just asked me. And I'm more than happy to share what my response was, but I shall just check with Eleanor that this is suitable for broadcast. And if it is, I shall tell you the tale after this. There's a pattern here as well. Stu reminds us, I'm former Armed Forces Intelligence, like your previous caller. I agree with everything he says. The other important point to remind you of is that Suella Braverman committed a serious breach of security, which would have resulted in extreme repercussions for me in my previous career had I done that. She was then reappointed as Home Secretary. So even Liz Truss got rid of somebody for the breach of the compromise of security, the breach of security in Suella Braverman's case. And Stu writes, this just underlines how seriously Sunak takes security, and it appalls me. 10:50 is the time. I'm going to tell you what happened to me, albeit that it's not immediately obvious as to why it's pertinent to this story. I think it probably is. So I was doing one of my book signings. Paperback's out on the 25th, actually. There's no point bringing the book into the conversation unless I can slide in a little cheeky plug. Paperback's out. There's new chapter, new material, new index. So if you've got the hardback and you keep thinking, where's that little bit about so-and-so? I can't find it. Then the paperback's got an index, so you can buy that as well. And right at the end of one of my book signings, a young lady appeared who didn't have a book and asked me for a selfie and to sign something else. Now, they'd stopped selling books about half an hour before she would have come round to the back of the queue. So I signed something for her, I can't remember what, and did a selfie. I know you may find this very hard to believe, but these are long queues that I have. It's very, very gratifying. Some of the loveliest evenings of my life, actually, meeting people who've come along to these events. And then as I was posing for a photograph, which my publicist, and don't laugh, but that's the correct title to describe my colleague who is in charge of publicity, my publicist offered to take the photograph, as she usually does. And as I am having my photograph taken with this lady, she whispers in my ear, "What hotel are you staying in?" To which I had two immediate responses. The first was, she should have gone to Specsavers. And the second was, someone's trying to fit me up here. This is just ridiculous. And I responded a bit like Hugh Grant. No, Colin Firth. But I responded a bit like Colin Firth in a Richard Curtis. I claimed I couldn't remember what hotel I was. I can't remember. And that was that. I didn't really think about it again. But then when we were talking about it afterwards, because my publicist said, "What did she say to you then?" And I told her, and she went, "Oh, blimey." Because when she gave me her phone to take pictures, there was some quite the screensaver was quite fruity, very odd, not my usual audience member at all. And I said, I think there was something a bit sus going, and we will never know, will we? But the idea that to answer Frank's question, what do you do if you think you are, if you have been in any way approached? And the answer, I would have thought, was to run at 100 miles in the opposite direction, especially if your job involves any form of public profile or, and in my case, there is no security except, I suppose, the personal details I've got access to of colleagues or people who've been into the studio. Actually, no, you come to think of it, some of my colleagues have prime ministers on their programme sometimes. Who knows what the security ramifications are, that we keep things secret until the day of an event because we don't want to advertise where people are. Mayor of London, of course, a regular guest on this programme, frequently finds himself in the upper echelons, the highest levels of security threats. So I could be a victim of blackmail. I could be a target of blackmail. And then if I handed over the personal details of anybody that I come into contact with, I would expect to be, well, what would you expect? Mark's in Godalming. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I listened to your programme on Friday, James, and it was very educational because the perspective was given by a bisexual bloke who said, you cannot have a conversation unless you return the picture of your genitals.
Yes.
And that is not, that's all right for that demographic, apparently. But for the vast majority of the population who are probably heterosexual, it's not standard practice once you get over a certain age. Probably. I don't know.
I think you, like me, have got a touch of the Colin Firths about you as you approach this issue, Mark, and I, for one, find it very charming. But yes, so it is important to register the fact that on Grindr, on this gay hookup app,
yes,
the eyebrow-raising response to news of people sending pictures of their penises is inappropriate because it is absolutely common behaviour. But that's fine. That's established.
In that demographic.
Yes. On that app, I think. I mean, almost that simple.
But I can't really think of a circumstance where I would do that. But, you know, who knows? Perhaps if I was madly in love with someone and that was initiated, I would be so stupid.
Sure.
But the point for me from today's programme is when you ask the question, why are they protecting this person?
Yes.
You have to look at it in the context of that demographic and the demographic that he's in, of the Tory party, who have not missed an opportunity to have no moral values whatsoever over the past 14 years. The only reason why they are protecting him is because he knows where the metaphorical bodies are buried.
So it is a quid pro quo because, far be it from me to defend this lot, but actually we can think of examples from the last 14 years when they have actually done the right thing. Liz Truss giving Suella Braverman the boot, Theresa May giving Priti Patel the boot, Amber Rudd leaving of her own accord, resigning on a point of principle. It's not that long ago. The pivot point is probably Owen Paterson, isn't it, when one of their own got caught misbehaving, and the response of Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and the rest of them was to attack the rules rather than to attack the rule breaker.
Yeah.
But it's not fair to talk about 14 years of moral corruption when there are examples comparable to this where the miscreant has been dealt with fairly roundly.
I think you're very generous.
I am very generous. You're absolutely right, Mark. It's a cross that I bear.
Well, thank you very much, James.
Thank you very much.
Keep on keeping on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And don't open any attachments. I mean, not generous, but certainly thinking of previous examples from within the last 14 years where the behaviour would have been dealt with. I'm pretty sure that Brooks Newmark was within the last 14 years as well, and he fell for a honey trap. I think he fell further, perhaps, than William Wragg did. But as far as memory serves, there was no question of him handing over private details of colleagues, and he resigned immediately following a sting operation. I remember that sting operation now because the Sunday Mirror ran it. But everyone else had turned it down. And the questionable techniques involved were raised by at least one MP making a formal complaint to Ipso. So it does happen. Jackie's in Stuttgart. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Well, firstly, I can't even hand out private extensions at work without getting into trouble.
Really?
Never mind, people's private contact details. My feet wouldn't touch. I'd be gone. I'd be out the door.
What sort of job is it, if you don't mind me asking?
It's only. I work in an office. We develop software and hardware for photovoltaic plants.
Yeah.
So there's a potential, I suppose, for stealing designs, but
yeah, of course.
It's not the point. I just can't believe Wragg's complete lack of judgment for a start. I mean, you have security clearance. You just don't go posting pictures of your bits on the internet. You don't.
No. Well, except that if you're on Grindr, you do. He's but not if you're an MP. No. So what I got for some reason, as you speak, I've got Venn diagrams popping into my head and circles intersecting.
Lord. I heard Friday's programmes. I don't want to know.
No, but here's people who routinely send pictures of their peckers to complete strangers on and then the other set is Conservative MPs, and there shouldn't really be an intersection of those two people, should there? I mean, that is the price you pay.
That's what I wonder about.
Yes.
But who else is involved? Who else sent pictures? I don't think the protection is particularly about Wragg.
They're trying to make it go away. They're trying to bury the story.
And they're making it. It's another example of Sunak sitting on his hands doing absolutely nothing. When he did this in November with Braverman, when she was stirring up the crowd, instead of acting robustly and either suspending or firing Wragg or having him step down, this business of trying to put a ring round him, trying to encourage other MPs to protect him, is making it worse. It's just fueling more speculation because people are wondering why. What is
going on? Well, I don't know. I didn't watch it myself, but at least two people have told me that it didn't even get raised on the Sunday morning, the BBC One flagship Sunday morning politics show. Are you sure? I find that, even by her standards, I find that impossible to believe.
Nothing. It's like we just la. We're going to pretend it's not happening. Angela Rayner, look over there.
Good grief.
It's mad, and the only thing it's doing by doing nothing is making people wonder how high up the food chain are the other two people involved.
How much more can there be? Well, yeah. I guess we're also back to the response from some corners of the Conservative Party when Hugh Edwards, when the Sun went after Hugh Edwards for again, exchanging of messages and images. Thank you, Jackie. And there it is. I don't think we've found anybody in the course of today's programme who can confidently say to me, if I did what William Wragg had done, I too would be untouched by consequence. If I got caught or I confessed to doing what William Wragg has done, I too would be able to return to work the next day without any diminishment of status or position or employment. And it is a little bit mad. Paige suggests it might even be woke to expect that elected officials shouldn't just abide by the same rules as the rest of us, they should actually behave better. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. Should we play one of those games where I give you the first half of a story and then promise to give you the second half of the story if you stay tuned and then often forget? We all enjoy those, don't we? Yes? Okay. How many Reform UK, and that's the one led by the bloke who isn't Farage, not the one led by the bloke from Lewis who wasn't Lewis. So how many Reform UK candidates have been ditched in the past week alone over racist, homophobic and obscene social media posts? Have a guess. Go on, have a guess. Don't let me forget. Keith, remind me. How many do you think have been fired, dropped as candidates by Reform in the last week alone after racist, homophobic and obscene posts popped up on social media? 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Turn your attention next to a completely different story. In fact, two stories which I am going to cunningly knit together. The first you probably could work out for yourself, but tenants are looking at 3 more years of rising rents. So the property market at large is cooling, but the experts reckon that your rent is likely to continue to go up at about double the rate that your earnings are going to go up until 2027 at the earliest. This is from the Resolution Foundation. The surging cost of new tenancies will begin to slow down now, but existing renters who haven't actually been hit yet that hard by rent rises are going to be hit harder by smaller wage growth, price increases, landlords, and a shortfall in house building. So, taking that as a given, I turn to a rather good investigation today in a newspaper that I find disgusting in so many ways. But when they do a story like this, they're pretty much the only paper left with the resources to do it properly. And the Mail has sent a journalist to Bristol to look at a scene that you would struggle to believe was happening in 21st century Britain. There is, Bristol is a very interesting city for a whole heap of reasons. And it's also blessed with a lot of green space. And it is alongside one of these green spaces on the Bristol Downs, part of which was bequeathed to the public in 1861, this being Bristol, almost certainly by someone who'd made a ton of money out of slavery. But nevertheless, it is along Parry's Lane, just to the north of the Downs, that a sort of de facto campsite has been established by people who presumably, well, not presumably, because the Daily Mail have interviewed some of them, by people who haven't managed to keep up with the cost of living crisis. So they have opted out, as it were. That speaks of choice, doesn't it? They have they have slipped through the cracks and landed in caravans, lined up on the edge of parkland in the city of Bristol. And in this encampment alone, the figure is reckoned to be about 800 people living in about 650 vans. There are students there, people currently studying. One of them says, I used to live in a shared house in Newport, but it was too expensive. There are people actually working. They meet one tutor who is working in his caravan, doing online tutoring. Another says, I've had a bad hand over the past 2 years, but for now I'm just trying to stay calm. He's got a job as a bar manager, hoping to pay off his debt so that he can apply for social housing. And this is described by the Daily Mail as a bright young man with a degree in illustration from the University of the West of England. They have to wash often in nearby gyms. One woman in her 30s told the Mail that her landlord is attempting to hike her rent by 60%. Others tell of remortgaging, so they don't just look at the people currently living in caravans. They also look at the people likely to find themselves in that situation soon, which is why I inevitably, I think, tie this story to the tale of tenants facing 3 more years of soaring rents. I think these stories are really important. And I also think that it is sometimes difficult for you to ring in on days like this because you're embarrassed. And I don't think you should be. I can't fix it for you, but I don't think you should be, because even the Daily Mail fail to portray these people as undeserving of your sympathy. Think about that for a minute. Daily Mail is an organ dedicated to turning British person against British person. Absolutely dedicated, in order to distract attention from what happens or from what people like Viscount Rothermere and Paul Dacre are up to, in order to distract attention from the fundamental inequalities of this country. Organs like the Daily Mail are dedicated to getting us to turn on each other. I warned you last year that it would be poorly people, it would be disabled people, it would be vulnerable people to come into the firing line next. And they have. The Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, currently leads that assault upon common decency. We know what has happened to refugees, immigrants in general, all of the individuals concerned. We know all of that. What I want to know is the scale of the change you have made to your life as a consequence of cost of living. And so, I mean, I'm not sure there will be enough people listening for me to confine this conversation to people who've moved into vans. We've met a couple by accident when having conversations about rental prices in general. A couple of people unexpectedly rang in to tell us that they were, not even embracing van life, because that makes it sound like a lifestyle choice, whereas I think we need to see it as a lifestyle necessity. There's a line here that I think is brilliant from a lad called Kyron who the Mail talked to. He says some of his friends don't understand. They say, "Oh, that's great, you get to live for free on the Downs, but I'd rather just have a shower." They don't understand the gravity of what I'm going through. So that I think... Listen, we've all got to look for the bright side. We've all got to look on to find the positives in whatever situation that we find ourselves in. And I think that this phrase "van life" has become a little bit glamorized, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, you're living off grid. You're living in an alternative lifestyle. Dale Vince. He lived off grid, didn't he? He lived he's been a wonderful guest on Full Disclosure. So it's not always absolute evidence of a life in freefall, but it's unlikely to be something that most people, given the choice, as Kyron puts it in this article, given the choice of living somewhere with a shower and living somewhere without one, most people would choose the more conventional housing, the more conventional home. 11 minutes after 11 is the time. So what have you done? And I think for our purposes today, it's going to be a direct consequence of rents. It's going to be a direct consequences of rent going up. And you've looked at your options. You're looking at a 50, 60% rise in your rent. You're looking at a 10% rise. I tell you what one of the most interesting markers of the cost of living crisis is. One of the most interesting markers is how often you catch me mentioning Mr. McCorber. How often you catch me reminding you of what it was that Mr. McCorber said about the relationship between income and expenditure. And I always get it wrong, but basically what he says is that if you are earning 1 shilling more than you are spending, result happiness. And if you are spending 1 shilling more than you are earning, result misery. Living within our means is such an obvious recipe for better mental health, for happiness, for positivity. But it's an increasingly impossible thing to do when, as this story from the Resolution Foundation reminds us, when your earnings are massively outstripped by your uncontrollable expenditures. Now, rent, property, mortgage is very much in that category. You know, you can move almost overnight from being able to comfortably afford where you live to knowing that you can't. Now, some of us would think, let's sit tight for a while. Let's hope that the tide comes back in again, and we might have run up a little bit of debt by then. But when things come back down again, we'll be able to clear that, and we'll be able to move on or move back up again. But what do you think the average rise for a rent in the UK is? The average rent in the UK, how much do you think it's gone up by since February 2020? I want you to genuinely think about this. What do you think it's gone up by? It's gone up by 33%. Now take the single biggest expenditure in your life, all right? Divide it by 3, whether it's your rent or your mortgage. Divide it by 3, and then stick that figure on top of what you currently pay. That's what's happening up and down the country, because the word here, the crucial word here, is average. That's normal. That's average experience. Your single biggest monthly expenditure, divide it by 3, and stick the number you get back on the original number, and that's how much you'd have to find next month if it happened to you. Which is why I started this introduction by saying I have got enormous sympathy for you if you find yourself in that situation, if you find yourself in that position. So, in the time-honoured fashion of this programme, what's it like? What have you done, and what's it like? 0345 6060 973. David's response is different but pertinent. Ours has just gone up from 1,300 to 1,900. That's more than 33%, which is why the word average is important. The drastic change on me, James, is that I now work 3 jobs and have 0 days off a week. It's horrific. Rishi Sunak and others are talking about us having reached a tipping point economically. Things can only get better, as Dee Ream so famously sang back in the 1990s. But this isn't going to touch the sides of average experience. Average experience is a 33% rise. David is part of these statistics. 3 jobs, 0 days off a week. These people in the mail today are moving into caravans. And more people, I think, are doing similar things. Like the Mirror, you've reminded me, someone's just reminded me, I've lost the article. The Mirror did a similar thing not long ago on people just living effectively on the roadside. I remember the first time you told me about homeless people with jobs. So we would be going back probably 12, 13 years. It always goes down under Labour and then comes back up again under the Tories. When I first moved to London in 1991, there were shanty towns. I mean, I don't know what other phrase you would use to describe the encampments at Lincoln's Inn Field in particular in central London, where I went to college very nearby, and I genuinely, I still can't quite believe it. Even as I tell you this now, I feel the need to check with somebody who was there. Be about 91, 92, and Lincoln's Inn Field was a shanty town. It looked like a favela in Brazil. People were living in shelters made out of pallets and tarpaulins. I feel the need to check. Did I imagine that? Did I imagine that? I didn't. And then about 12 years ago, you maybe a bit less, maybe say 10 years ago, you started telling me that the fella who slept in the doorway of Morrison's near you actually had a job in Starbucks. And that's where we are now. So you can't really muster up the usual tactics if you're the editor of the Daily Mail and turn people against each other on this, because they will respond by pointing out, no, I've got a job. I'm a delivery driver, or I've got a job in a bar, or I'm a student, or I'm working online as a tutor. I just have to live in a caravan because the average rent has gone up by 33% since February 2020. So what's it like? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What have you done? And what is it like? It's 11:17. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. It won't just be Bristol, of course, but Sarah tells me there's loads of van sites there now. St George's Park even has a makeshift commune next to the park, and Pitters knows of what I speak. I worked at Lincoln's Inn Field in the early to mid-90s, James, and yes, it was a shanty town. They had a regular soup kitchen there. I don't know if I've expressed that to you. I'm trying to think what my kids would think. Just that idea of it being normal to walk through I mean, there'll be lawyers around Lincoln's Inn Field earning millions of pounds, weren't there? There's sort of corporate HQs there. It's got one of my favourite museums in London there, the Sir John Soane Museum. But when I arrived, I remember I'd been at boarding school, I'd grown up in Kidderminster, and I'd spent the previous 6 months living in a shared house in Chorlton-cum-Hardy in Manchester. So it wasn't an entirely rarefied experience, but I couldn't believe my eyes. And I think we're in similar territory now, albeit that the caravans have replaced the pallets and tarpaulins. Will's in Taunton. Will, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, just about 5 years ago, I think it was late 2018, I ended up having to move into a caravan because, financially we couldn't afford the rent anymore. It kept going up. And the problem is that once you're out of housing,
yes,
getting back in is an absolute nightmare.
Because you need a deposit.
Because being poor is expensive.
Yes, that's Vines's boots, isn't it? That's the
Very much so.
Yes. What's it like?
So the upside is you're very in touch with nature, and if that nature decided to destroy everything you own, it would cost, I think, tops $5,000 to literally replace everything in my life, which is good in a way. The downside is that, of course,
It's
it's
a terrible phone line, Will. I'm afraid. I do want to, give you the space that you need to tell your story. But so you're talking about paring down. Can we just see if we can improve Will's phone line and then get him back on as soon as possible, please? Thank you. George is in Reading. George, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, it's hello, James.
Hello,
sorry, long time listener, first time caller.
Welcome.
Basically, I couldn't believe the topic because it's described my life, what I'm currently going through.
Go on.
So I just turned 50 in December. I had incurred a load of debts. I'm an IT contractor.
Right.
I had started from the loan child scheme. I was fighting that debt. I got really depressed, and unfortunately, I just started spending like crazy. So I added a load of personal debts, but because I was still in work, a high-paid job, getting a very good income, my credit rating was great, so I could always remortgage and get a loan and remortgage again, and just keep going up. So the debts kept going up. I was meeting all the debts. I was never in, the credit rating was always excellent.
Sure.
Until
and it seduces you a bit, doesn't it? You sort of think, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know that I've in the past thought, well, if they think I'm good for this, then I can obviously afford it.
Yeah.
It's sort of low level.
Is good.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it comes to a point where it's starting to get harder to get a mortgage. You're not meeting as much criteria from the bank. You need to have a certain more. I also had a flat. So the flat that I lived in, I retained it, so I had that as a second income.
Okay. So you were in a fairly strong situation, and then the tide went out, did it? The wheels came off.
So then COVID hit, so I was paying double mortgage on the flat, so that was just increasing the debts. And then I was out of contract with double mortgages not being paid.
Oh, God.
And as COVID's going on, a pandemic is my biggest fear. I don't think nuclear war will happen, but pandemics is how we go. So the pandemic, I was really stressed out. I was up all night just watching news from all over the place. Anything coming out of China, all through Europe when it was really attacking Italy first.
Yes.
Just see what's going on. I wasn't sleeping at all.
And this affected your work, presumably.
Yeah, well, I was out of work by
and you
that
didn't
time,
have
so
that. So crikey, so everything. So what you're describing is the toll that it all took on your mental health. And I'm embarrassed that I'm going to hurry you, but I have to. You understand that, George. So when push came to shove, you lost both your properties, did you?
Yes. I had to sell both of the properties. I was trying to think about how to make my resident property into a HMO and stuff like that, and it just didn't work out. It just wasn't going to work out. It was still going to be a whole load of stress. It shouldn't have taken me this long, but the decision was to sell it all. At least I'll be debt free. I'm still got a 20-year career in IT.
So what's happening now then? Where are you living now?
So it put me through so much stress. I didn't want to go back onto the property market. The UK property market just scares me, especially coming from London where everything is ridiculously overpriced.
It's very hard to get back,
Yeah. So I didn't want to go into a flat, and I was just trying to work out how to do it. And I just thought, it's just me. Thankfully, it's just me.
Right.
No kids. I've just got a long-term girlfriend, but no kids. And I said, a caravan. So I bought a 6-berth caravan.
Right.
So that's a 6-bed basically.
Yeah.
So it's enough space. It's more than enough space for me.
Sure. Where is it?
And At the moment, it's on my friend's driveway in Reading.
And your friend's cool with that for now?
He is, thankfully. It's a lifesaver.
Yeah.
It's a lifesaver. I have been on sites. I've been on site, so you can only stay on site for 28 days unless they do seasonal. So I thought, okay, I'll move every month. Now, when I first made the decision, sorry, I know I'm banging on, decision to get in a caravan, work didn't require me to come in. So I think, I can finally see the UK. I'm a London guy, so all I know is beaches. I don't know. I just see adverts of Cornwall and Dorset and stuff. So, that looks lovely.
Yes.
So I thought, I'll get out because I need to change my lifestyle as well, because I was just I just go from a screen at work to a screen on TV and play games, or it's all screens.
Yes.
I just wanted to get out and do something different. So this was a whole lifestyle change as well. But then work, they haven't learned the lessons from COVID, so they start pulling people in. So we have to go in.
So you've got to be near work. So you can and flip it out. So I mean, it's all congregated on your head at the same time, hasn't it? What briefly, George? What does the future look like? Are you planning on getting out of the caravan, or do you see yourself there for the foreseeable now?
Oh, for me, until I retire, I'm going to be in the caravan.
That's it. Now you've crunched the numbers. You've done the
until I retire. So now,
what happens when you retire? What happens when you retire?
But I've got plans in place. So because I'm earning a decent wage, so basically I should be able to put a minimum of $2,000 away every month.
God, you're on a good crack.
Yeah. So.
No, all right, I get it. So, I mean, it's a slightly different experience from the more obvious examples of what we're describing. But in a way, it's smack in the middle of the story as well, because it's about the circumstances overtaking you, really, and the caravan, then becoming the only way that you can keep all the plates spinning. And at least you sound as if you know what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like. So there'll be plenty of people, of course, who don't. George, look after yourself, mate. Stay safe. Tim's in Tottenham. Tim, what can you tell us?
Hi, mate. How's it going?
All good, mate. What's on your mind?
All right, good. So I went into a caravan in about October last year. Before that, I'd been working in TV show. In fact, before that, I mean, we spoke a few months ago about, I think it was about why the government wanted us to get silly little jobs riding bikes, rather than hold out for better jobs.
Yes.
So I ended up, I was working for a TV show. I was on quite good money, but then the actors' strike came along, the SAG-AFTRA actors' strike, and everybody got fired. 40,000 of us got fired on the same day. So that was all right. I started putting applications for housing benefit and stuff like that in, because I could see it might be a while.
Yeah.
But then I got, my landlord decided to put the rent up by £500
a month.
Because they're, from 1,500 to £2,000.
That's exactly 33%. Sorry to jump on that. I know it's not, but it is a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? Averages.
Exactly that.
Yeah, there you go.
So that put me in a bit of a sticky situation. I didn't really have a way of getting a flat after that, because I had no income.
Yeah. And you couldn't afford to stay where you were.
I couldn't afford to stay where I was. This was in Highgate. This is a Highgate village, 2-bedroom flat with a balcony, close to all the parks, Hampstead. It's beautiful.
Lovely.
I loved it there.
Yeah, I bet.
It was absolutely fantastic. So anyway, I ended up, when push came to shove, I hadn't come up with a way of finding a new place. I wasn't going to be eligible for housing benefit until I did find a new place.
Of course, yeah.
So luckily, although I had no reserves, my mum, this is embarrassing because I'm the same age as you.
Right.
I'm having to go to my mum to ask for a loan. She's having to go to the bank to get a bank loan on my behalf.
For what? To buy what?
To buy a caravan.
That was the plan. That was what you saw as the only way. As with George, that's the only way I can just make the numbers work at the moment.
Yeah, I looked all around for different options. I co-own a house, a property with 5 acres of land in Portugal.
Right.
I wanted to go there at first, but I thought, well,
so when times were good, that was something that you had a few quid to throw into the pot to purchase.
Yeah. Before I worked for TV, I ran a massive property, a warehouse, also in Tottenham, that was full of actors and musicians, people who were doing really, really well.
Yeah. They just pulled the rug, mate, didn't they? The rug got
Yeah.
pulled from under you, and what you do to get back up again is very hard to map. And you're still, and so you're where if you don't have to tell me this. Where is your caravan parked? Where, if that's the right
It
word?
was in a holiday campsite in Lee Valley, where you're not really supposed to live.
Sure.
And I've ended up having to move out of there because I was looking at the prices that were going to go up over summer.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to summer, it was going to be about £1,500 a month just for the pitch, which, I could get a flat for that. Well, sort of a flat.
Well, that's because they're holiday,
studio.
they're seasonal rates, aren't they? So they get that's what holiday makers will pay for their holiday. So where are you now?
Yeah. So I've got another flat.
Right.
It's in Tottenham now, but on the high road. It's £200 a month less than the place that I lived in Highgate. But bear in mind there, I was in a beautiful area. I got 2 bedrooms and a balcony, a big flat. Here I get 1 room. It's a kitchen with a bed in it.
Yeah.
The door opens straight onto a corridor that is usually full of crackheads, smoking, crack, heroin, filling the place with the nasty smoke.
Yeah.
Because the front door onto the drug dealing hotspot doesn't lock.
No.
So, once I'm in my flat, it's nice-ish, but the fact that is so similar in price to what I was getting in Highgate just a year ago is the difference in what's happening.
No, and of course, that adds to the sense of stagnation. So I'm going to get out of this. You've made progress in one sense by getting out of the caravan and into a flat, and yet how could you not compare the flat that you're in now with the flat that you were in before and see the complete difference, even though the money is barely different at all. Tim, mate, take care. These conversations are very, very important, and I can't have them with you, but I don't think there's any subject that makes me wish that we had magic wands more than this one. There really isn't. 11:32 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 11:36 is the time. Colin points out that, or explains that deep within the UK is the ideology best described by Ebenezer Scrooge. That's, I think, before the ghost of Jacob Marley visited him in A Christmas Carol, when he said, there are plenty of prisons and workhouses for the poor. And speaking of literary references, a couple of you are wondering what on earth I was talking about when I talked about Vimes's boots. This is a quite beautiful distillation of economic reality by the late, great Terry Pratchett, who had a character in his Discworld series of novels called Sam Vimes. And I'd read it to you, actually. It's worth listening to it in full. The reason that the rich were so rich, Vimes reasoned, was because they managed to spend less money. Take boots, for example. This is the caller a few moments ago said that being poor is expensive. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's not. Take boots, for example. A really good pair of leather boots cost $50, but an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two and then leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, while a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. And there is the theory of Vimes's boots, which is sort of an economic explanation of almost unparalleled simplicity and clarity. We're having a broader conversation, if you're just joining us, about the relationship between income and outgoings, but inspired in part by 2 stories. One about rent going up by a third on average since February 2020, and warnings from the Resolution Foundation that it ain't stopping anytime soon. It's forecast by the Resolution Foundation to rise at almost double the rate of earnings between now and 2027. And then a remarkable investigation in the Mail into the city of Bristol, but some of these circumstances I'm learning from you are emulated around the country, of people looking at their options. And this is, forgive me for sounding a bit voyeuristic, but this is what I find interesting. You look at your options, as all our callers today have done so far, and you think, the only thing that's going to work for me now is to move into a caravan. So you did. We haven't done much on what it's like. We've done a bit now on what it's what the journey to one looks like. But what is the lived reality of giving up a flat, as it were, or a house for a caravan? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 11:39 is the time. Sam's in Northwich in Cheshire. Sam, what would you like to say?
Oh, just a similar experience really with the effect of rent. I've due to rent going up and private landlords putting it up every year. I've moved around a hell of a lot. I've probably lived in 14 different addresses over the last 5 years.
Good Lord.
The beginning of my experience really was just before COVID, where I was living in the Midlands, and relatively lower rent at that point, pre 2020. Obviously, at the end of that, rent wanted to go up. I recently had a little one born, so looking at kind of moving a bit close to family, and found a property in Northwich at the time, which was like a kind of a muse property, a really small apartment. I had the unfortunate circumstances of actually living next door to my landlord, which
that can be a plus, but in your case, obviously, it wasn't.
It was definitely a negative.
Okay.
There were a lot of issues around the flat with plumbing and things like that, and that person was a new landlord and didn't quite understand what their responsibilities were. So we had a lot of issues with the plumbing, and eventually we kind of got somebody out to deal with it. Tried to speak to the landlord and say, look, it is technically your responsibility. It's inside the property. It's the pipes. They refused. They refused to help out. So I had to kind of fork out the money for the drainage people to come round. I did end up having to borrow money for that. We did get that back at the kind of end of the tenancy. That place was about £600 a month.
Okay.
Eventually, we kind of had a fallout with them.
So where are we now, Sam? What's going on now?
So at the minute, I've managed to find so my last property was £550 a month. The landlord then wanted to put it up to £800 a month.
Yeah, I don't think most of us realise the scale of these increases unless you're smack in the middle of it. You see, I know that, when mortgages went bonkers after Liz Truss's lost weekend in Downing Street, that you get some indication of it. But those of us on the outside just presume it would have gone up by 5% or maybe even 10%. But some of these rises are absolutely epic. And most of us make a choice based on what we can afford. So if you can afford it yesterday and then it goes up by 30%, you simply can't afford it tomorrow.
It doesn't help as well. With
and you're in work,
everything else. Yeah. Which wages don't really go up in line with CPI. With everybody putting prices up as a minimum of CPI, your wages do not go up in line with that. So you still end up in the same predicament.
What do people expect to happen? So what does the light at the end of the tunnel for you look like, or is this just the sort of hamster wheel that you're?
It's like a bit of a vicious cycle, really.
Yes.
Obviously, with the landlord wanting to increase the rent by practically £300, we found somewhere else. We're actually quite lucky, really. We managed to find a housing association that offers rent at a lower than the market rate at the time. So we ended up moving again, found another property, but we've only been here about a year now, and it's already gone up from £540 a month to £650 as of this month. And this is a housing association.
That's a 20% increase, and so then you start wondering about what's going to happen next. What do you do if you want to guard against this sort of thing? Do you just move to somewhere that you can really? I mean, this sounds so naive, doesn't it? So you move somewhere you can really, really afford. This is why I'm thinking about the flat in Tottenham that Jamie's in compared to his place before, and you because you know that it's going to go up and up and up and up. So this is until 1997. I beg your pardon, until 2027 that the increase in rent is likely to be double the rate of earnings. So how many more people are going to be pushed into the kind of positions that we are discussing here? I don't know quite what the political capital is here, because given some of the changes that have been made to the electoral system, I don't imagine many of the people that I'm reading about in the Daily Mail today in Bristol, or many of the people that have got such a peripatetic existence, as Sam describes, living in so many properties over such a period of time, they're going to be much harder to get votes. I don't know that there are votes even in this, given the state of the electoral register and the stuff, the reality of moving around all the time. And the idea that likelihood of the next election being fought by Rishi Sunak claiming that things are getting better seems to be completely detached from the reality of what we're discussing. Thank you, Sam. Paul's up next after the break. The reality of what it's like I want to look at as well when you're in a van, 0345 6060 973. Because I've seen it online almost sort of slightly mythologized. And I've had one message saying I'd rather live off the grid than be exploited. And I do understand that. I get that subculture. Back in the days of rave, there was quite a crossover between the sort of traveller, new age traveller community and the rave community. And I saw the appeal of it there, but forgive me, not forever, not for the long term, and it was something that I presume would get harder and harder as you grow up. It's 11:45, and I'll give you that number immediately after this. Today's tea time teaser, except it's not tea time. Tea break teaser, we could call it, at 11:45. Tea break teaser, shall we introduce a new feature on the programme and then completely forget about it by the time we go home today? Yes. And today's tea break teaser is, how many candidates do you think Reform UK has ditched in the past week over racist, homophobic and obscene posts unearthed on social media? Have a little guess at that number, and I'll give you the real answer, the correct answer, after this. It is 11:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Five candidates in a week ditched by Reform UK. And this is people that had got through their vetting process and were poised to stand at the next general election. And they've been let go over the past week over racist, homophobic and obscene posts unearthed on social media, which I predict will see the party being described as woke by its admirers before close of play today. 11:49 is the time. Back to the vans. Back to the curious combination of cost of living plus income. I mean, you can't talk about cost of living without looking at income. And if your rent is going to go up at roughly double the rate of your earnings between now and 2027, then I think a lot more people are going to look at the setup and find themselves thinking that the caravan is not just the only option available. Paul is in Bristol, appropriately enough, because that's where this conversation started. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
I just wanted to bring it home, really, to Bristol and say, because I'm a van dweller. Okay. And it's such a nuanced conversation.
Yes.
The reasons for being in one. I mean, I spent time up at Parry's Lane, up by the Downs. And there's a huge mix of people up there that you've already alluded to. I mean, I'm actually a tradesman, so right. I have a steady income. But it just feels like we live in this era now in the UK where like a home almost feels like a luxury item.
How old are you?
I'm 40.
40. And when did you? So I presume that you had a home.
I did,
an adult.
Yeah.
When did that change, and how? If you don't mind telling me.
No, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it started when I had mental health problems around when I sort of turned 30.
Sure.
Which is a bit of a cliche.
No, it's not.
But so I had to kind of go over this bump in the road where somebody offered me a van to live in. I started living in it, and I had to sort of endure this first period where your sort of self-worth goes really low.
Yes. And
you feel kind of scared, you feel vulnerable, and you also, something that's unique to the UK, it feels, is that you sort of get scowled at a lot, and you get a lot of negative, people aren't interested in your story, why you're there or who you are, what you're doing. People just want you gone, out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
And it's not quite like this in France. There's more of a culture of people who travel for work and, work to travel and such.
Yes.
So it's quite a relief when you get to the continent and you can sort of move around freely and work, although...
hang on a minute.
I was actually starting to work more in France and Portugal as a carpenter.
Really?
Before Brexit. And the door's been slammed shut for me.
Well, I mean,
on that front as well.
Don't forget that everyone knew exactly what they were voting for, Paul. It's very condescending and patronising to suggest otherwise, as we must constantly remind ourselves, while the evidence that none of these people had the first idea what they were voting for mounts up on a daily basis. What do you miss most?
Well, just because of my age, it's become a sort of point where physically it really takes its toll on you. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are benefits to both. Somebody alluded to being closer to nature, which is seasonal. If the sun's out, you feel like you're on a win.
Yes.
But I get a lot of back and body problems and things, and that affects my job. So, but I'm only ever one small problem away from needing to do it. Like about 2 months ago, my niece had a baby at the age of 15.
Right.
And I'd suddenly have to make, decisions about I need to be able to help.
Yes.
Her mum needs to stay at home for a couple of months. She's self-employed. And so I go back into the van in order just to have any sort of spare income. If I need tools, if I need to change anything in my life, I can't do that while I'm living.
So you need to raise a few quid. The thing you do is move back into the van. It's almost like a loan facility, for want of a better phrase, a credit facility.
It's the only option. In order to have options, it's a bit of a paradox or something.
No,
but
it's
in
not.
order to
I understand
have any
what
options,
you're saying. Yeah.
Like I had a few tools stolen not that long ago. It happened, but then, luckily I was already in the van, so I was able to, make some money and pay it back. But it just feels like I said before that we live in this time in England now where it's a luxury to have even if you're lucky enough to have one, all of your money is
going down
is going into it, all of it.
What does the future look like? What do you aspire to, if that's a fair question or even a helpful one?
To be honest, I have to take a bit of an ignorance is bliss.
Sure.
In order to
you mean a one day at a time kind of attitude?
Live almost month by month.
Yeah.
What do I need to do this month? What do I? And then, fortunately, you have very dark times in the winter.
I'm sure you do.
And then in the summer, you sort of feel like you have a few more options or something. But I can't really look ahead. I'd like to get out of this country really, but I don't know how to do it. Really?
No, well, it's been, as you've just alluded to, it's been made immeasurably harder. How's your sister getting on? How's your niece getting on, more importantly?
It's amazing. She's really lucky to be raising a child living at home with, it wasn't the plan, obviously, but
no, sure.
See the way that the family are all coming together and, many hands make light work and... So she's doing amazing, actually.
I mean, it's been around. Parry's Lane in particular has been it's been used in this way for quite a while, hasn't it? It might just be now that some corners of the media, like me, are waking up to it. But for you, it's been a reality for the best part of a decade, I think.
Well, yeah, there's so few of these places, really. I mean, I'm from Devon, and it's extraordinarily difficult to find a piece of tarmac in Bristol. In Devon. Just to stop for the night. It's a really difficult country in order to have this lifestyle. It's unlike anywhere in Europe.
I don't know enough to make those comparisons, but I'm happy to be guided by you on it. I wonder what the historical just explanation for that is. Something Victorian, possibly, or actually landowners is what it will be, won't it? It's primogeniture and landowners, and I'm always struck when I spend time outside London by the amount of the country that's still owned by individuals, and I'm always reminded of that line from the last Duke of Westminster when he was asked for advice on wealth. He said, "My advice to you is to have an ancestor who was best friends with William the Conqueror." And you think that's funny, but you seriously, that will be part of the reason. If our unique history of landowning in this country will be part of the reason why there are so few what could be loosely described as common spaces, which is what the place in Bristol is described as, because it was left to the people in halfway through the 19th century. I've got very, very little time left, but Mark in Durham, you're going to have to squeeze your story into a couple of minutes if you can. What would you like to say?
Yeah, you're right, mate. I've been living in a caravan every weekend since last year. I went through a divorce.
Okay.
So I become homeless. Lost my vehicle. My vehicle was stolen.
Oh, no.
It had AdBlue problems. I was dealing with solicitors over it. I had to sell my car. So basically, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I've worked hard for the last 16 years to basically pay for my car.
Yeah.
I've got married, kids. I've basically had to start my life again. I'm still living, being classed as homeless. I've had no help through mental health. The council said you're not a priority. And not a priority to the point, even though I'm dealing with mental health.
Where are you sleeping in the week?
In the back of a vehicle.
So you're a driver, you're a professional, you're a haulier, are you?
Yeah, I'm all over the country.
And
basically, what it cost me, these new vehicles that keep having problems, cost me nearly £20,000 on top of buying the vehicle, to basically want to sue the main manufacturer because it had the same problem 5 times. And then in the process of all that, I was at a van hire, so I'm paying for 2 vehicles. It's like I've just been working. I don't have time off.
No, it sounds thankless. It really does. And even without the domestic upheaval as well. And, like the last caller, Mark, in full-time work, that perhaps is why much of the media doesn't know how to cover these stories, because it's impossible to slide them into the cliches and the stereotypes that have typified much coverage of the cost of living in the past. You've got a full-time job and you're being absolutely kebabbed. I did warn you that I didn't have much time left, but I still apologise for the fact that we couldn't keep you on the line for longer. I think we'll take a complete change of direction next. And it is a challenge to the long-held belief that hugging a child too much will make them clingy. You should hug your little ones more. And I shall explain why after this. It is 2 minutes after 12. A lot of people referencing Gary Stevenson, who, of course, was a guest on Full Disclosure not long ago, and just this month, I think, or last month, and a former city trader who has written and does YouTube videos about economic reality, and many of you pointing out that he is probably a lot closer to reflecting the lived experience of people in this country, whether you consider yourself well off or not, than much of the sort of traditional commentary allows. I want to change subject completely now. And for the first time since we started spending our mornings together, I can't remember what happened to me. I can't remember what we did on this. I think I can, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a story about hugging children. There are a few things when you're a parent that are more stressful than advice. I think the big one, and I've got to tell you, my oldest is 18 now, which I know some of you will find impossible to believe because you were here when she was born. But that is how much time has passed since we started spending our mornings together. And the big one was breastfeeding. The big one was the pressure that was put upon mums to breastfeed, even if it was incredibly difficult or painful or tricky. And the other one, I can't even remember what the books were called. The other one were leaving them alone to cry. Do you remember? This is the health secretary wading in on this, saying that generations of parents were given the wrong advice about how to care for newborn babies. So the idea was that if you hug a child too much, it will make them clingy, and therefore crying babies should be left to soothe themselves. And the Department of Health is launching a specific campaign now to challenge this perception, to actively encourage new parents to hug their children more. Sometimes I almost envy the sort of lazy, knee-jerk, tabloidy response to stories like this. You can see how much fun it must be just to sort of hit here, slapping your head and going, well, whatever next? We're going to be teaching people to hug their children next. Whatever, oh dear, I don't know. The world's going to hell in a handcart. You can almost envy a kind of Sun or a Daily Mail columnist because they can get their work done in about 40 seconds. So what's the story? Doesn't matter. What's the response? Oh, whatever next? This is awful. The thing about professional advice is that you are minded usually to take it. And therefore, when it changes 180 degrees, it's very hard to make sense of. How will you feel now if you took the advice back in the day. You're going to remind me what the name of the writer was that we all... I've already done the Reform UKT. Stop sending me messages complaining. The answer was 5. What was the name of the book? There was a book that actively encouraged you to leave your children to cry. And my memories are coming back to me now. It was unnatural. But if I say we didn't do that, then you will feel that I'm criticising you for doing it. But if you did do it, if you actually lay in bed listening to the baby screaming its lungs out, and you were like, no, we can't go, no, we can't. There was a book. What was the bloody book called? There was a book that everybody read back in the day. It'll come to me in a minute, or actually it'll come to my inbox in a minute. And you say it was just odd. No, you've got to let the baby cry so that they soothe themselves. And you turn on your radio this morning, or you open your newspaper this morning, and you learn that now the official advice from the government, no less, from the Department of Health itself, is the polar opposite. You're now being encouraged to cuddle your children as much as they want and comfort them when they cry and mirror your baby's reactions and emotions. The idea that you can be too tough can damage a young child's mental health and have an impact even into adulthood. It is, as I say, from the Secretary of State for Health, no less. As our understanding has improved, so too must our communication of that advice to parents. Yes, that is the correct person. That is the book I was thinking of. 7 minutes after 12. It was a writer called Gina Ford she probably still is. I just haven't got a great deal in the... I haven't got a lot of skin in the game at the moment for the early days of having babies in the home. So that's one way into this story, but I don't know that we can do that. You can't tell me what impact it had on your child or you that your parents didn't. Well, actually you can, because what I'm interested in is physical affection in general. I'm interested in what it's like to grow up without it. If your parents don't show you love, your parents don't show you affection, that men in particular, until relatively recently, found it very hard to articulate their feelings. I kind of can't quite imagine A, what that would be like, and B, what impact you think it's had on you in later life. So as the official advice goes 180 degrees against what I remember being told just 18, 19 years ago, what are the impacts, do you think? What is it like to grow up with parents who cannot demonstrate affection? You know that they love you. I don't mean cruelty. I don't want to talk about cruelty. I found the last hour quite harrowing. I don't want to talk about cruelty. I want to talk about people. I want to talk about mums and particularly perhaps dads who really struggle to show affection. So on an intellectual level, you know that you're loved, but on a physical and emotional level, the evidence of it is as rare as hen's teeth. They're spending £300 million on this campaign. You see what I mean about how easy it is to be a knee-jerk tabloid type? Got £300 million! Wow! Whatever next? 400 family hubs across the country and online, all providing advice to new parents and offering a place to meet others facing similar challenges. Same governing party, of course, that got rid of all the Sure Start centres that provided a similar service. But, hey-ho. I suppose better late than never. The idea that unhelpful advice early in your baby's life, such as being told to let a child cry it out or to limit physical affection, nearly a third of us say they now feel guilty about following those recommendations. So that's what I'm interested in as well. Listen, I hope everything has turned out brilliantly for you. I really do. And I appreciate the temptation of getting in touch to tell me that you followed this advice and your children are absolutely fine. Thank you very much. But there is something a little unnatural about leaving a crying child uncomforted. I thought so at the time, and I think so now. But if you did do it, if you did follow the advice, the popular advice at the time, which was to stop physical affection, to let a child cry it out. Quite often, I think your own mum would be telling you that am I getting this right? Your own mum would be telling you that it didn't make sense, but it was very, very popular for such a long time that a third of people who did it now say they feel guilty about following these recommendations. So that's what I want from you, okay? 2 things this hour. One is growing up without expression of physical affection. What is that like? And as I stress again, it's not about a cruel upbringing or an abusive upbringing. It's you feel an enormous sense of tenderness towards your parent now as an adult when you reflect upon how hard they found it to show love. Among the myriad blessings I've had in my life, this categorically the absolute literacy both my mum and my dad had. And from my dad, who was a sort of Yorkshireman born in 1939, it certainly wasn't a given that he would find it easy to express his feelings, but he did. Both my sister and I are constantly bombarded with love and with hugs and with physical affection. So what is the opposite experience like? 0345 6060 973. But I want also to dig into this, because this must be a horrible thing to listen to on the radio, is that you've always suspected. So you did what you thought was the right thing to do, and no one is doubting that for a minute. But you suspected even at the time that there was something a little bit unnatural about leaving a distressed child to cry itself out. That was the phrase that they used. And if you hugged a child too much, it would make them clingy. You did it because you thought it was right. And now the actual government is spending £300 million on teaching people the polar opposite. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So we've got the adult who was denied physical expressions of love growing up and what you think that has done to you or what you remember about what that was like. And then I think the rather harder conversation to conduct, which is parents who I think are going to be sort of my age-ish and younger. Maybe 40 to 60? I don't know. But absolutely everywhere you turned, the advice was, and we didn't take it. I think we tried maybe for a night. I do remember now. I remember having these phones. One of the people involved in this conversation is very litigious, so we probably won't mention any names. It's all coming back to me now in a big flood and rush. So the advice to let a child cry themselves out and not to hug them, you took it and you wish you hadn't. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There's quite a lot to get through here, but just for the record, I think it's wonderful that governments do things like this. And if you struggle to understand why, then I would actually remind you of the conversation in the last hour. If you're going to make every single opinion you hold contingent upon the experiences you have, then you're going to live a very narrow and desiccated life. You would say to yourself, for example, well, I didn't need any lessons on how to look after my children. And then 10 years later, if you do what I do for a living, you'll be complaining about a proliferation of mental health problems among young people or about kids being too woke or whatever else it is. Your whole worldview is built upon an inability to imagine what it would be like to be somebody else. So think back to what our second last caller in the last hour said about his niece, who's a teenage mum at 15. You could be 25, you could be 35 and still not know really which way to turn in the early weeks, the early months of parenthood. And the idea that it is the role of the state, it's like a nanny state in the purest sense. It's the role of the state to actually step in and help people lead the best lives they can lead. Seems to me to be a mark of civilization, albeit something that would strike terror into the heart of the Tufton Street vampires. The government will take responsibility for providing advice to new parents and providing a place where those parents can meet each other and share conversations about facing the same challenges. I don't know, start the clock for somebody to start attacking it for all the reasons I've just detailed. But start your clock for calling me on the twin question, really, of a parent who loves you but can't show it. A parent who loves you but can't show it. And possibly, of course, you're that parent. I don't know whether you'll be able to phone me and talk to me about it, but if you fancy it, I'm all ears. And secondly, that mad period where new parents were being told by the world and his wife that if your baby started crying, you had to leave them alone. How did you deal with that advice? And where are you now? It's 12:15. 16 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, there's no objective algorithm for childcare, but there are trends. So, some children could have grown up in absolutely horrific circumstances and have come out wonderful, defied the odds, and vice versa. Some people with incredibly loving backgrounds can end up leading lives of dysfunction and chaos. But you have broad trends and broad truths. Mike in Edinburgh says, I was left to cry as a child. As an adult, I've suffered with anxiety. I have no idea if there is any correlation, but I've certainly taken a different approach with my own child. And then by contrast, James in Norwich writes about having gone down this route exactly, and it worked really quickly. And the lad's 17 now, and he's an absolute pleasure to be around. So, there isn't going to be, as I say, an objective algorithm. But I find myself now thinking, at my time of life, that advising us not to hug our kids when they were crying was just weird. Still the case, James. It's called sleep training, and it involves leaving children to cry it out. Most of my NCT group did it, and my baby's now 3. I tried it for a few nights, but it was completely against what I thought was natural and nurturing. Yeah, but you'd see, Emma, you're putting me now. We sound like we're calling those other people unnatural and unnurturing. Whereas I don't. Anyway, let's open the phone lines and I can stop tying myself in knots. Samantha is in Peterlee. Samantha, what would you like to say?
Hiya there.
Hello.
Just in relation to the parents grown up children without affection, displays of affection,
Go on.
I was raised by my dad. I'm 32 now, and I was raised solely by my dad. My mum was not in my life.
Gosh.
So I was a young lady or a young child with a male parent, and it was very weird. So the instance I explained to the lady who was talking to me before I came on air, when I was 9-year-old, I was walking through Stockton Town Centre and I was holding my dad's hand, and his wife at the time shot my dad a look and basically said, let go of her hand, she's far too old for this now. I was 9.
So you had a stepmother?
I had a stepmother, yes,
right.
But it was a very brief marriage.
Oh, okay.
But before the stepmother...
God, and you remember that now, don't you? You remember that moment now?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that's it. At the time, it was very fundamental because I couldn't understand why he wasn't allowed to hold my hand.
Oh.
And the way it got portrayed was, well, look at how people are looking at you. And it was, I think what it was is, it was a man holding a woman, well, not a woman, I was only 9, but a girl's hand.
Oh, dear.
I explained to the woman as well before I came on an instance when I was younger. I was about 3-year-old, and it was when my mum had left my life.
Yeah.
My dad and I used to travel around the country, and we used to stay in bed and breakfast.
Right.
And my dad explained to me at one point that the looks he used to get walking into bed and breakfast and asking for a shared room with a 3-year-old little girl with him. And he's like a 6'6" man. They were very taken aback at the beginning of it. But then
do you think they were though? Do you think that was in his head? Or do you think that was?
No, I don't think that was in his head at all. No, because I've actually seen it. Yeah, I've actually seen it and been around it with him and etc. But on the other thing about the affection, I never really got hugged. I got an acknowledging nod.
Right.
I never really got much affection in the way of a kiss. I never got a kiss on the forehead. I never got anything like that. When I did get a hug, it would be diluted with a pat on the back or something, to, bring it back from not a feminine action, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I do. And do you remember feeling that you wanted more when you were little, Samantha?
I did, because obviously going to the female members of my family, like my grandma, I kind of got hugs off her and everything, but it just didn't seem like a father's role to hug their daughter to me. No. And now I've got a daughter, a 12-year-old little girl, and I'll tell you now, when she was first born, every fibre of me wanted to love her and hug her and hold her, but something in me made it very hard to.
Oh. How did you get on with that?
Oh, brilliant. She's amazing. I can't keep offering. She's amazing.
You overcame your instincts and you did. You were a demonstrative man, much more demonstrative than your dad.
Oh, definitely. I mean, she helped me, if anything. I mean, it might sound stupid, but I asked her, "Can I hug you? Do you need a hug?" Because I didn't really know what the.
Because no one had taught you. No one had taught you the vocabulary of physical affection, really.
Well, that's it. The non-verbal communication of I need a hug. Read in a room. Am I allowed to approach you? Do you want me to approach you? Many a time she's had to say to me, "Mum, please, will you just hug me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sorry, yeah, I'm doing it now."
You got me there. You got me there.
Yeah.
Well, and is your dad still with us?
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's more than made up for it. He's fantastic.
I was going to say, is he a good granddad?
He's a brilliant granddad and he's a brilliant dad. He's done a lot for me. It's just like, even though he wasn't affectionate, I was loved.
Well, that's the point. I'm so glad you understood what I was in my clumsy way trying to say. That it wasn't about neglect, or it was just about men who'd never been taught really to show love. Well, and maybe if your mum had been around, it might have been different. But he had no one to follow, did he? He had no.
No. Oh. Well, I'll tell you this before you let me go, and thank you for taking my call. You're very articulate. I do enjoy it.
So are you.
Well, the one thing I do remember, one of my happiest childhood memories is before my dad would go back to the family home after work, he would pick me up and take me to the shop, and we would eat a bag of raisins in his van, away from the family home, so that me and him had that time.
Little moments together.
Yeah, like quickly eat it, we've got to get back, they'll know we've gone, and that's nice. So that's what I mean. It wasn't a hug, but I got affection in a way.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that you've covered so much ground there, and I mean 3 generations as well, and all leading towards such a happy ending. Thank you, Samantha. 23 after 12 is the time. Sort of rather different experience here. From Tony. My mum admits that she left me to cry. We adore each other, but she was very emotionally void growing up. She experienced a lot of trauma herself at home. So not only was I left to cry, but I was sent to my room whenever I annoyed her. This would now be classed as emotional abuse, but it wasn't called that then, and I know it has affected me. I'm an extremely anxious person. As an only child, I suffered in silence so much because my mum didn't connect with me. And this is you can't put your name on the bottom and then say anonymous, because I'd have to read it from the bottom up. But here we are, no names. Afternoon, James. This topic hit home. Had a great upbringing. I was privately educated. I never wanted for anything. My parents, however, in particularly my mother, are just not affectionate in the slightest. It's still deeply awkward simply to hug, and I'm 30 now. It's taken a lot of work to stop it completely destroying our relationship in adulthood, because sometimes a lad just needs a hug. And that ties in beautifully with Samantha's story, doesn't it? Especially when her daughter came along. Mark's in Yarm in North Yorkshire. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi. It's the first time I've called. I'm a little bit nervous.
Hey, take your time. Absolutely take your time.
So basically, I'm 58 years old. And my mum is nearly 87.
Yeah.
And neither parents ever showed me any love or affection, and she still finds it hard for me to give her a hug.
Oh.
But I sort of don't want them off her anymore, but I long for a relationship, a loving relationship with a parent. My father never, ever cuddled me, and I know this isn't part of your...
Hey, you say what you want. You say what you want.
He was not a nice man, but
okay.
I still long for that child-parent relationship. And I'm 58 years old, so it has affected me severely, and I suffer from really bad anxiety. And I feel very alone, even though I've got 6 kids. But those kids are aged from between 5 and 30.
Right.
And I give them all love and affection.
So you've broken the cycle.
Yeah, I've gone exact opposite to
Have you spoken to your mum about how you feel ever? Have you tried to break it down with her, or is it just too far?
I have, yeah. And she said she's not a tactile person. Right. And she said she never got cuddles. She never got anything when she was younger.
Yeah.
She doesn't understand why it affects me the way it does. She does love me. She tells me she loves me.
Yes.
She just can't show it. And
That's
she
tough.
doesn't understand how it's affected me the way it has. But she also brought me up to say, men don't cry, boys don't cry.
Yeah.
And that's totally wrong. I cry a lot.
Good.
And I'm not embarrassed to say that, because you do need to cry.
The alternative, it's like a pressure cooker, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah,
if you don't let it out, you'll blow up.
I did. I bottled it up for till I was 28. And
Really?
at 28, I had a nervous breakdown.
Oh.
And ever since then, I don't bottle it up anymore. I just let people know,
And you're a lot healthier as a consequence of it.
Possibly. I mean, I do suffer a lot with nerves and anxieties, but God knows what I would have been like if I hadn't let it out.
And you can show love to your children as a consequence of making those discoveries.
And then, you know what the best thing is? When you show the love to your children, you get it back. You get it back in spade, like boatloads.
There's a little bit in the middle where you don't necessarily, isn't there, with some of them, between about 14 and 18 or something like that.
Yeah. My 5-year-old, he just follows me around like he's my shadow. Unfortunately, my wife died last year.
Oh, Mark.
She was only 42, and since she died, he literally is my shadow. But I give him all the love and affection that his mum and me would have given him.
Oh, bless you. Well, that's it.
I just wanted to make the point, like, how it doesn't matter, like, how old you are, you never get over it. I'm 58.
I know. That oddly, the maddest thing about therapy is a certain type of therapy always brings it back to the child you used to be, and it teaches the adult to actively look after the child they used to be, which sounds bonkers, doesn't it? Until I hear voices like yours describing what you're describing. Really is a sense of loss for little you, isn't it? A sense of which is still part of who you are. Still part. Yeah. But think what your lad's going to be like with all that. And I know losing his mum is just unthinkable. But he's at least he's going to know that crying is okay. He's going to be able to deal with his feelings. He's going to be able to love his dad and hug his dad back. So breaking that cycle might be one of the best things you've ever done.
It definitely is, but it doesn't. So what I long for, I'll never get. But so I'm sort of stuck in that part of my childhood. But I'd never want them to feel like that.
No, but you can, and I'm not qualified to do this, but there's one thing that's slightly different, is that 58-year-old Mark can tell 5-year-old Mark that he's safe now and he is loved. He's loved he's loved by you.
Yeah.
You can look after. You can almost put your arm around yourself, almost, can't you?
Yeah, I'm my 10-year-old little girl, my 13-year-old. Like you say, my 15-year-old doesn't want to hug, but
not now.
My 13-year-old does. Unfortunately, he saw his mum die, so he's traumatised. So,
well, do you know? Imagine if you were not capable of talking about this stuff, because he's going to need to talk to you about it at some point. They all are, and you're ready. You're up to it. That's fantastic, mate.
Anyway, thanks for taking my call, but I do have to go. I've got an appointment.
I won't keep you any longer, I promise. Just in a word, you feeling all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Because for a lad with anxiety, that was not an easy thing to do, and you smashed it, Mark. You absolutely smashed it. Oof. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. I'm going to warn you that Mark, a lot of love coming. Oh, you won't be able to hear it. He's gone for his appointment, hasn't he? Bless him. But a lot of emotion running high here, and some of it I expected, some of it I didn't. 2 texts to read you. One from somebody happy to share their name, and one from somebody who doesn't want to. So first from David. He says, "My dad never told me he loved me. He was a minor and seemingly never did that sort of thing. I was on my way down to the hospital to see him on his deathbed, and I was on the phone to a mate on the way down, and I told him that about my dad, and my mate said, have I ever told him that I loved him? And I said that I hadn't, but I did when I got to the hospital, and my dad told me that he loved me for the first time. He said, I could have cried for England. I'm not surprised, David. And this one is a bit different, I'm afraid. And I'm not going to name the person that sent this. My mum was never affectionate to me. No hugs or I love yous or cuddles when I was a child. I still remember that when I was 39 and I'm 60 now, my husband left me and my mum was at my house when he'd sent a particularly harsh letter. I sat with my head in my hands and asked her, what do I do? And she walked over and laid her hand on my forearm. I remember thinking that this was it. That's all she could offer me. Mum's in palliative care now and I'm the only one who goes to visit her. It's a 100-mile round trip twice a week and I'm really nice to her, but I can never bring myself to say that I love her when I leave or even to kiss her. I obviously do, and I'm so affectionate with others, but I just cannot show Mum obvious affection, and I do feel bad about that. Please don't read out my name, as I'm a bit ashamed to admit this. You shouldn't be ashamed. Shame's such a terrible, corrosive thing, and that's little you. Little you not having the vocabulary in that room with that mum to do what would otherwise come very naturally to you. But I read those out together for a reason, because there's a slim chance, perhaps, that David's ability to muster up an I love you when his dad was on his deathbed might help you muster one up. Because, what's the worst thing that could happen? I suppose it doesn't get said back, which is probably why you're not. Trying it yourself. God, what a tangled web we weave, eh? Hannah's in Twickenham. Hannah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks
Hello.
so much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
You've said a few things that have really resonated with me. But, to start, both my parents were completely emotionally unavailable, emotionally stunted. Their parents showed them no emotions. And I think through years of therapy, I was able to understand that, and that child therapy you mentioned was so powerful for me. And so, because I didn't realize until that point how much it had affected me. When we grow up, to me, it was normal. People don't say, I love you. They don't hug you. It's just very much sort of a transactional relationship. And to the point now where my sister and I we just physically cannot hug each other. We want to. We've talked about it. Our therapist, we have the same therapist, has said, could you try to hug each other now? And it's just so awkward.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
And we laugh about it.
I know, I can tell you can see the funny side. It's like a sort of, I don't know, like you've been hypnotised almost into not being able to do it. Yeah,
but I think the thing that's turned it from sorrow to almost, I don't want to say happiness, but just an acceptance where you can laugh at it, is the understanding, the therapy that helps you understand where your parents have come from, and that ultimately they're just flawed individuals like we all are, doing their best but not knowing how, and using the tools that they were given or not given in this case. And so I think when you do the work, you start to Mark, and I felt for him as he was talking, because I recognise I was in that space for a long, long time, just longing for love and not knowing how to find it, and often finding it in the very wrong places and in the wrong people, because you get these breadcrumbs of emotion and you think, oh my God, that's love, and you run after, in my experience, men who just weren't the right men. But then you go and you do the work and you go, oh, that's what it is. That's what it's like to love yourself, to not need validation from others, and accepting why others can't give it to you. And my daughter was the trigger for that, because I didn't want to be the parent that I had for her. And so I went and did the work. And funnily enough, you started about the cry it out method. I tried the cry it out method with her for a week. And she cried every night until she vomited.
Oh, dear.
And
crikey.
I just couldn't do it. But that's what our parents did with us.
Yeah.
I remember they left my sister in the kitchen by herself, because we shared a room and I couldn't go to sleep.
Right.
And they would leave her in the kitchen for hours, and she would just scream and scream and scream and scream. And I just thought, I can't do that. There's something so...
counterintuitive.
Yeah, just heartbreaking about it. And I can't imagine what they must have felt like, apart from the fact that my mother must have been on her knees because she was getting no sleep. And so when you start to think about it in the circle that it is, there's an acceptance I think you can find, and I think there's healing in that.
You describe a liberating experience, I think.
Yes.
Don't you? And you heard Mark. You see, I heard Mark as well, but you heard more than I heard when he was speaking, because you heard you.
Yeah, I did. And I don't know if I can say a name of a therapy I did, but I did this course.
Yeah.
And it's an 8-day course, and I can tell you now that I went in one person and I came out a completely different person, and that course saved my life, and it saved my child
your
as well.
Relationship with your child as well. I'd mention it. Mention it to the producer. I don't know why you're wary, so you've made me wary. Your wariness has proved contagious, but I'll happily share it once I've had a look at it. I talk about my own therapy quite a lot. I don't remember what the official title of it is, but the thing that Mark said about still needing it now is that he's never going to get it, but actually he can fix that hole. He can fill that hole in different ways by recognizing that little him is safe now and lovable and loved. It's an act of loving yourself. It's the maddest thing that's ever happened to me by a country mile. When a therapist said to me, "You will talk to that cushion over there." I've written about this in my second book, and you will talk to that cushion. And I had an idyllic childhood in many, many ways, but I had some very evil teachers, one of whom used to beat me quite violently and formally as well. And that had affected me in ways that I could never have imagined until I did, as Hannah just described it, until I did the work. And that was when I started looking after him. And from that moment onwards, as Hannah said, everything changed. Everything changes in little ways and big ways. Mark's in Leek in Staffordshire. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi James. First time caller, long time listener.
Well, you pick 'em.
I know, yeah. Well, you had 2 Marks on now.
Go on. Yes.
I mean, I was adopted at 3 months.
Right.
So obviously I don't particularly remember that. But my parents have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. But
even though you say so yourself.
Well, yeah, come on. But there was no real physical affection.
Right.
And even now, my parents are both still alive. I'm 55. Parents are 88 and 87.
Gosh.
There's still no, even now, there's still no hugs. So with my kids, I've got 4. My youngest, my eldest, again, it was a bit of a difficult situation. I moved away when he was young to work. But now I've got, we still talk, and we've got a good relationship, which is big. But my other 3 kids, 17, 14 and 11,
I'm just all over him like a bad rash. My daughter hates it.
Yes.
But, every day I have to give my two lads, the youngest who's disabled, got a condition called Charge syndrome. But they're just hugged at every given opportunity.
Were you conscious of it? Were you conscious of the absence when you were little? Because you didn't. You knew you were loved.
I don't think so.
No, you don't.
I don't. It's weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. I'm sure I heard somebody earlier say that that little boy who needed a hug is now why we give hugs.
Yes.
And that's exactly where I'm at. I don't know, is it generational, or like you said, I'm not sure. But my three youngest kids, they all know that they're loved, even though they push me away.
But that's probably relevant as well, because you want to show them your love and your physical affection, but actually you're a beginner because you never had it the other way around. So you're a bit clumsy, and that's why they react in the way that they do.
Yeah, very, very clumsy.
Aren't we all? Well, that's lovely stuff. Thank you. 2 marks, both hitting the marks today. It's incredible responses coming in as well. Very, an awful lot of people. Crikey, I'll read this out without any names, I think. I insisted on the cry it out method because that's what all the experts were saying. Luckily, my partner doesn't listen to LBC. Well, let's hope so, eh? It's just gone 12:45. More on this. It's a subject we'll return to. Isn't it amazing that after 20 years together, we can still stumble across things that we've never talked about before? There's nothing new under the sun, of course, but talking about new things, never done that. And David's story about saying I love you for the very first time to his dad when his dad was on his deathbed, and his dad saying it back. Getting stories now about dads who didn't say it back, which is the risk, isn't it, that you take when you put it out there. Although, as Kathy says, I've forgiven him now, but it wasn't easy at the time. Henry Riley's had all the best jobs. He's been at there's been another Reform UK press conference or event this morning, and we've sent Henry there, and he'll tell you what happened after this. It is 12:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. An awful lot of experiences out there pertinent to what we are discussing today. Hopefully we'll be able to squeeze in a couple more. But the political pantechnicon continues to roll. Henry Riley gets all the plum jobs. He's been at a Reform UK event this morning. Is Lee Anderson still on board, or has he gone for his fourth party in 5 years yet?
No, Lee Anderson's still on board. He was actually one of the main speakers at this event, James.
Let joy be unconfined.
Well, and exactly, and you'll hear more from Mr. Anderson in just a second. This was Reform UK trying to park their tanks on Labour's lawn. The event was entitled Labour's Betrayal of the Working Class. There were two main policies that were announced. So firstly, on the NHS, Richard Tice says, the party's leader, he wants to scrap the net zero emissions drive. He says that would cost around £30 billion a year. Scrap that, and that would lead to more money for the NHS, and then there would be zero waiting lists within 2 years. He said the Labour Party were too focused on the woke managerial middle class who are also eco-zealots.
Say that again, sorry.
He said that Labour are too focused on the woke managerial middle class who are also eco-zealots.
Okay.
Could have been a bit piffier, I suppose. And then said he would not give the money to bungling NHS bureaucrats. Now, you mentioned Lee Anderson. He was up next to announce the second.
Has something gone wrong here? So it's Henry's frozen. It looks.
Have I?
Yeah, well, you did. I don't know. Did you freeze? No, sorry.
No.
Carry on.
Well, this was Lee Anderson's
freeze. I thought you were just looking moody. I thought you stopped mid-sentence to give me a sort of stare. Anyway, carry on.
This is Lee Anderson's pledge on miners' pensions.
Now, when I was wondering whether or not to join Reform and having discussions with our leader, Richard, one of the things I went to see him about was the mine workers' pension scheme. And I gave him the Bayes report. And he forensically went through it. And after about 2 days, he came back to me and he says, Lee, this is an absolute scandal. He says, these are working class people in areas like Ashfield that have been let down by successive governments, and we must right this wrong. This was music to my ears, so I'm delighted to announce that The Bayes report was produced in 2021 by the Bayes Select Committee. That will get the recommendations in there. We accept the recommendations in full. Miners' families will be better off with reform.
Now, you may think, James, that's a pretty sensible idea. He's taking in the Bayes Select Committee recommendations from 2021. The chair was Darren Jones, who is now in the Labour shadow cabinet. There's a slight problem, though, James, because Stephanie Peacock, who's a Labour MP in Barnsley, actually coordinated a letter at the time which said, sign this if you're a Coalfield MP, to implement all of the miners' recommendations from that particular report.
Oh, no.
And Lee Anderson's name was not on that particular letter. I'm also assured that he was offered the chance to sign it. All Coalfield MPs were, but his name did not appear. Also, James, controversial candidates were on the lips of some of the questioners to ask Richard Tice about that. Richard Tice had this answer when he was asked about some controversial comments made by candidates.
The scrutiny has been very intense. There's probably been a year's worth of scrutiny in a month because our candidates have been up on the list for, I suspect, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. And so we're very clear to all our candidates, for heaven's sake, you know, if you're going to have a glass on a Friday night, then don't use social media. It's not sensible.
So if you have a glass on a Friday night, do not use social media, is Richard Tice saying his advice to candidates.
So these
also,
just to be clear, these are candidates who've said things like Africans had IQs among the lowest in the world. There's some that I can't really read out on a favourite family programme, but racist, sexist, homophobic posts, inevitably some pretty vile abuse of Angela Rayner. How does he know it only happens on Fridays? There's loads of it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I didn't put that to Richard Tice. I probably should have. But I think he was making the general point that maybe candidates have had a few drinks and they're a bit loose with their Twitter.
Okay, so 5 in the last week have been axed.
Quite, exactly. Lastly, James, there's a bit of a feud between him and Jonathan Gullis, who's the deputy chair of the Conservative Party. I asked Mr Tice about that. I wondered if you're any closer to publishing the material you have on Jonathan Gullis that you've referenced about on Twitter a few times.
Well, Mr Gullis is not in the room. No.
Exactly, so tell us.
No, I've always said I would keep discussions and information about MPs quiet. But look, politics is a rough old game, and sometimes there's a bit of strong banter between people. Mr Gullis threw out some accusations against me, and it's all in the banter of the day.
So it's just banter. This was when Richard Tice said he had multiple bits of embarrassing personal information on Jonathan Gullis and said he should pipe down.
Henry, thank you very much indeed. So we're not, goodness knows, embarrassing personal information on Jonathan Gullis. I think I'd probably be happy not knowing. But so no prospect of this being revealed. How many people were there?
About 7 of us journalists, but it was quite a big room. There wasn't a huge turnout. There were quite a lot of empty chairs.
Okay, and did you get a chance to speak to Lee Anderson yourself?
I did. I tried to talk to Lee Anderson. He's not. How do I phrase this? I don't think he'd be appearing on the James O'Brien show anytime soon. He wasn't a huge fan. Oh, one thing I neglected to mention, James, when there was a Q&A,
yes.
The most difficult question actually didn't come from a journalist. It came from a Reform candidate who said, Richard Tice, it's all very well you putting these figures up, but how can I believe the figures? And then Richard Tice had to justify to one of his own candidates in front of a room full of journalists why he should believe the party's figures.
All human life is here. Thank you very much indeed, Henry Wright. That's a shame but why would, if 30p has a problem with me, why would that prevent him from speaking to you? You haven't been sniggling. You haven't been sniggling at him, have you?
No sniggling. With eels, isn't it, sniggling? But I did put to him that he's never spoken to me before. We could have a bit of banter but no, he wasn't very keen.
That's a terrible shame.
I know.
I can only apologise for denying you the unimaginable pleasures of a proper conversation with 30p Lee Anderson.
Well, I'd like to have asked him about that letter that it appears he didn't sign, to give him a right of reply on that.
Well, you could have gone with something a bit easier before hitting him with the Frost Nixon movement. I'd have thought. But stop sniggling.
Sorry.
12:56. Henry Riley live from Millbank, where he has been attending the Reform UK event this morning. I'm short of time, which is a shame because this is a topic that may not lend itself to squeezing into a couple of minutes. But that's all I've got, Nick, in Leeds. So what would you like to say?
How do? I'm from a large family. My mum and dad were more than loving to us all. Every time we left, they both kissed us and we kissed them. When I was a teenager and my mates used to come round, 17, 18, and my dad used to kiss them as well.
It's got a touch of the Brian Cloughs then, I think.
I absolutely hated it.
Of course you did.
Unfortunately, one of my friends got brain cancer, and he passed on a couple of years ago. But before he died, I went to see him and we were talking. And I said to him, I was so jealous of you when we were younger because you could stay out and do whatever you wanted. He didn't have to be in early. I had to be in 8 o'clock. He could stay out. And he said, I'm jealous of you because your dad used to kiss me and my dad never, ever kissed me. And all my life I was so embarrassed. He not only Adrian, but all my friends. And when we used to come out of the house, I used to think, Dad, stop doing that. And unbeknownst to me, it had a massive effect on my best friend.
Isn't that extraordinary?
And, yeah. It was.
So that was the only the only real physical affection he ever got from a man.
Yeah.
From his, stayed with him.
From his friend's dad.
From his friend's dad. Oh, flipping out, Nick.
Stayed with him right up to 58, so it'll have been 40 years. Longer.
What a story.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that.
Never mind. It's all right.
You've done me. It's a good job Sheila's here because I don't know if I could hold it together for much longer. This conversation. That's like because my dad's from Leeds as well, so I can hear. I hear echoes.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic parents. 11 kids. Absolutely brilliant.
Same here. And it's such brilliant parents that they even had some left over for your mates. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time